today's video is sponsored by Manta Sleep, who invite you to join the pro-nap movement with their adjustable premium feel sleep mask.
Yes, folks, it's true. While I'm sure this information may be confusing, even shocking to some, it's time for me to go fully mask off. Yes, it's a Manta Sleep promo. Shows on YouTube, so that's what we're doing.
Look, we all know summer means days are longer, sun is brighter, and while all that extra daylight can feel energizing, it can also quietly sabotage your sleep. Later sunsets disrupt your body's natural circadian rhythm, making it harder to fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up feeling refreshed.
Now I like to use these little cooling cups. This is the version I like. Stick them right on the eye parts here, put them on your face, and your eyes stay nice and cool. Cool as in your eyes stay cool, the sensation, not cool as in you look cool. I'm pretty sure I don't look cool with this on, but also I don't care because I'm sleeping.
That's where Manta Sleep comes in, because taking control of your sleep environment helps you get real restorative rest no matter how long the sun stays up or when you need to sleep.
So follow the link in the description and use promo code MovieBob to get that deal and join the pro-nap movement.
Sometimes the movie announcements make the decision for you about what the next episode's gonna be. Okay, so I said in the Superman review and in the longer kind of cut up from different audio episode that I had a prediction, reaction, Superman episode still coming. Obviously part of that would be talking about, spoiler alert, we had Supergirl show up at the end of the new Superman movie, and people have thoughts and takes and such about that this seems like a very different type of character, and we didn't necessarily know how that was gonna come in, play out, whatever. But now that the movie is a big hit, we know that they are now full steam ahead. They were already full steam ahead on that being the next movie. Guys, you gotta stop listening to people who don't know fucking shit about movie production on this goddamn website and on other goddamn websites in general when it comes to movie production timelines. One of the great institutional knowledge failures of people just not visiting real websites anymore and just going only off of their social feeds from YouTube and Twitter, if you're still on fucking Twitter, and if not, please get the fuck off Twitter. There are other options now. Get the fuck off of Elon's Nazi website. Is that the algorithm jumps people who have no idea what they're fucking talking about instead of real news organizations to the front of all the reporting. So people aren't hearing about real production timelines for things anymore. So they assume that it takes like a year or a couple months to make a fucking movie. No, they started shooting Supergirl months ago. They've been in production on it for over a year now. That movie was coming no matter what. Yes, there's always the possibility that someone like a fucking David Zaslav cancels a finished movie, like with Batgirl or Coyote v. Acme or something like that, but they seem all in on this James Gunn, Peter Safran DC Universe project, so this is happening. Superman's a hit. They feel pretty good about all of this. This movie's coming out. It was just a question of whether or not it was going to be the next one. Now, clearly, it's going to be the next one because they're almost done. Anyway, I thought that was just going to be a couple things to talk about. Yeah, hey, this is pretty interesting, but we don't know what's going on with it in the midst of all of the other, hey, look ahead, where are we going, who was this in the movie stuff. But now, James Gunn just tweeted it out. As the saying now goes, I was working on the story and he just tweeted it out that now we've got a poster. Plus, I owed the sponsor a video for this week that I could actually put a commercial in front of, so here's that. And it seems like, yeah, this is not just a gag about the dog being a piece of work because the owner's a piece of work. She shows up at the end of the movie, and now there's just clearly the tone they're going for, that this is not the Supergirl that maybe people were used to from the comic that they've taken at least the title from, or at least what was the title now, much like with this one, they started out with a subtitle and said, wait a minute, don't subtitles kind of suck on these? Shouldn't we just call this Supergirl? And so they are. So this is not Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow anymore. It's just Supergirl. And I kind of have a feeling that the main thing they're taking from this, from the Tom King Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow book, is that she's in space. Maybe some of the plot, but basically that she's in space. Sort of like how Thor Ragnarok was not a Planet Hulk movie. It was just, hey, the Hulk is on another planet doing arena fights, and that was kind of it. Which I think will probably be for the best, if so. But we'll talk about that in just a minute. Also, yeah, this is another mostly unscripted episode. I know some folks have asked why I do unscripted episodes sometimes now. Yeah, I gotta be honest, folks, I kind of like unscripted better. I know not everyone likes the half-dry read stuff, and these certainly are much more of a bitch to edit. Personally, I like the way this sounds more so than scripted. You can make your own joke about liking the sound of my own voice. I certainly just did. Personally, with so much of YouTube now sounding like AI slop, because it is, I welcome whenever I come on a video that sounds as much like a human voice as possible, so preserving as much of my own human voice, mistakes and all, pauses, ums, uhs, my natural accent as possible. Just consider that my own small act of rebellion against how much of this website has been taken over by robots reading scripts. Anyway, Supergirl. So predictably, we don't know really anything about this movie other than Supergirl is a character in Supergirl, and that the only other character that we necessarily know of is that Jason Momoa is playing Lobo in it, which is already sounds like fun. He was playing Aquaman before, and now he's playing Lobo. I feel like Lobo is more mainstream now than he maybe was when he first showed up at first couple years of comics, because he's been in a bunch of cartoons. But if you have no idea who Lobo is, he's an alien biker bounty hunter guy who's strong enough maybe not to win a fight against Superman characters, but he can certainly fight them. And he's a crazy, beer drinking, cigar smoking biker guy, but he's also a space alien who can get in fist fights with Superman and Supergirl. It's pretty cool. Just imagine that type of guy, but played by Jason Momoa, and that seems like a easy layup character. He's like a DC character who shouldn't really fit into what you typically think of as the DC universe. So that's when he's like a parody of 90s characters in 90s comics, and he works better than you'd think it would. It sounds like it would get old, but it's usually used just enough, and I like the idea of it. It seems like an easy thing to use Jason Momoa for, so yeah, that should be really cool. And some people seem to be having a problem with this, and I have no real idea how much of this is actual opinion coming from people and how much of this is the segment of fan stuff that has just decided to have a bug up its ass about this not being Snyderverse stuff. They have, for political reasons, decided to hate James Gunn. I think that's most of it, because we know nothing about this movie other than 2 actors who've been cast in it and the fact that it exists, so who knows. But so far, Supergirl shows up at the end of the new Superman, and it's like a big reveal that she's younger, and she likes to party, and she is the owner of Crypto the Superdog, and he's a mess in the movie. He's like a badly behaved, wacky, crazy dog, and she's a badly behaved, wacky, college-age chick, and apparently she wasn't here because she was off partying and getting drunk on planets where it's possible for their species of alien to actually get drunk on whatever space beer or whatever. So that's their angle, is that she's a drunk party chick. And you know what? I dig it. I understand, they're conceptually why people who might not be just deciding to hate whatever version of this and just, filling in the reason later might dislike that. Because I think kind of every version that we've had of Supergirl on screen has either been a nice, cute young girl or Superman, but a girl. So, nice, moral, upstanding, upright. The version they did on the CW with Melissa Benoist, which I was a big fan of, was pretty much Superman, but a woman. And that's fine. That's perfectly okay. But I do think that you need, a different take after that. The Supergirl on the CW, if people forget that the CW shows were actually popular enough to stay on TV, that was on for, I think that made it to 8 seasons, right? Supergirl was on for a while. But, they just did that version. They can't do it again. Just doing Superman, but female, is Captain Marvel. That's already a franchise. The first one made $1 billion. The second one, not quite so much. A version of Supergirl that's more of a warrior woman, also valid. They've kind of done that as Wonder Woman already. Again, another franchise that made $1 billion the first time, or close to it. And then the second one, absolute train wreck. They're not going to do that again. Now, there's not room for it, but you probably do kind of need to have a new take on this, and they've got a new take on it. And we haven't really seen this type of characterization with a big A-list female hero before. And there's nothing that says that you can't, as far as I'm concerned. You want to talk about representation, role models, whatnot. If you're going to have a full range of available roles for women in A-list movies and big franchise pictures and whatnot, you got to be able to have them play the same kind of, messed up, fucked up characters that guys get to do. If Chris Pratt can jump from being just a schlubby dude on a sitcom to being one of the top action guys and having multiple roles and, lead off the Jurassic Park franchise for a while and be Star-Lord for 3 movies and a couple Avengers movies and play that character as a guy who is rowdy and horny and gets wasted and chases girls and gets in trouble and is kind of a douche. Why should only male actors get to be the heroes and leads of things and also be a mess? How come female characters either have to be villains or ingenues? I know that's kind of a trite take, but it's true. So that's a thing. In terms of whether this falls in line with any previous comic characterization of Supergirl, there's been 7 or 8 completely different characters of Supergirl. Main thing is, at this point, I don't give a fuck about accuracy to comics, because these are movies, and movies are different. They can be adaptations. I think aesthetics and tone and nailing a vibe and hitting a broad audience is much more important in terms of what comic adaptations are supposed to be, more so than hitting plot points and crossing every T and dotting every I of comic continuity, because comic continuity by its nature is a jumbled fucking mess that doesn't make sense and nobody can follow. That's both why it's fun and why you can ignore and pick and choose and cherry pick whatever you want. The first Iron Man movie was not comics accurate, quote unquote, because it, hit every single beat from Tony Stark's origin story. No, it didn't. He's wounded in Afghanistan instead of Vietnam. The Mandarin basically doesn't really exist in that movie, and it changes his whole characterization from what it was in the original comic books to Robert Downey Jr., but his name is Tony Stark. But what it gets right is that the armor is totally cool, and it's red and gold like it's supposed to be instead of some gray metal Christopher Nolan-y bullshit, and it acknowledges that his world is big and goofy and broad and has the capacity to eventually become the Marvel Universe. That mattered more than setting it in an exact replica of his comic continuity, which was already all over the fucking map. Who cares? But in terms of, is this whole concept accurate to Supergirl comics? First question, which one? Second question, sure, plenty of them. What people forget about the original Supergirl comics is that unlike the way that they use the woman and girl interchangeable naming scheme in these characters, because sexism, basically, in the original Supergirl books, the fact that it was Supergirl and Superman was actually pretty important because she was supposed to be notably younger and more irresponsible in her original Silver Age incarnation. What people forget is that in the Silver Age, they published, originally, the original impetus behind Supergirl was that they published Superman stories and Superboy stories simultaneously. But Superboy stories were prequels about Superboy when he was a teenager in Smallville. And with a lot of fans who grew up reading the classic Silver Age Superman books from the 50s, 60s, 70s, that whole era, what people will almost universally tell you is that a lot of the big, weird, unusual, classic Superman stories were cool, and they had cool villains and big crossover stuff with the other DC books, but in terms of characterizations, where Superman is an actual character, the Superboy stories were often more interesting because he got to be a real character. He got to screw up because he's a teenager. He's supposed to make mistakes. The Superboy stories were very cool. Superboy stories is where Bizarro first showed up. It's where Krypto the Superdog first showed up. It's where the Legion of Superheroes had their origin story. It's where Lex Luthor's origin story happened. Superboy stories were cool because it's about a teenage hero who's allowed to make mistakes and hang out with people, and he doesn't just have to be the paragon guy who is always right and doing the right thing because he's Superman. So the impetus to do Supergirl back then was really the editors not only looking at it and saying, hey, we should have a female version of Superman, that would be interesting. It was, what if this interesting, teenage version of Superman that we've already had such success with in the Superboy comics could interact with Superman? But instead of just, having, let's have another Superboy, and they tried out a couple other teenage versions of Superman. I might have my timeline off. I'm not going to flip over to another window right now and look up things. But this is partly why the Legion of Superheroes can time travel, so that occasionally teenage super people could interact with Superman as well. But it was pretty obvious, let's give him a cousin who's a female who comes from Krypton who shows up, and that's Supergirl. And she's off on her own book, and they were trying to get more female audiences to read comics anyway. And Supergirl had kind of the same energy with the addition of having, quote-unquote girl problems. This was not a perfect era representation, certainly in comics. She was often a more interesting character in that era than Superman was, because she got to fuck up. She went to school. She had boy trouble. She got pissed off at her girlfriends. She would make mistakes. She had weird romantic stories. No, she wasn't pounding beers and going on spring break and getting in trouble, but like the Archie Comics style back then version of it, kinda, yeah. The whole point of those stories was often that she would get into trouble, and then Superman would show up like a dad in those comics and go, young lady, I hope you've learned. Like, yeah, that was kind of the vibe of a lot of Supergirl comics. So doing this as the modern version of that, yeah, I'm kind of interested in it. I think it's fun. They've hired Millie Alcock, the actress whose name is basically a dare for bad comedians, to play this role. That sounds fun. She's a good actress. She was great on House of the Dragon. She's been good in other things, so let's see how this goes. And especially having this version of the character teamed up with Lobo in this movie. I think a lot of people just kind of assumed Lobo would be the bad guy because this, big, brawny biker dude guy as the other character in a Supergirl movie. It kind of seemed like, oh, well, he must be a villain, like ultimate toxic masculinity guy versus what most people's conception of Supergirl is. Clearly, this must be the villain. If this is where they're going with her, I don't think he's necessarily going to be the bad guy in this. I think he might be like a, an anti-hero, maybe someone she goes to for help. Are they going to do like a True Grit thing? Are they going to be like, oh, she needs help, she goes to find like the baddest dude, and this is the baddest dude? Is it going to be like a reluctant team-up thing? Is this just someone she knows because she hangs out in like rough places, and this is a guy she knows? Maybe he's still a villain, but maybe this is a villain that like she respects, or someone that there's a villain sometimes here. That seems more interesting now. This is suddenly a much more interesting, unusual place to go, because Lobo is the kind of guy who can be a good guy or a bad guy in different situations, and that's interesting. That's a more interesting movie than I necessarily expected it to be. So I think that's kind of cool. And I think that this is a different thing. People also seem to be just kind of expecting now that James Gunn's making all of these movies. James Gunn's not directing this one. This is, I think, Craig Gillespie is directing this. But yeah, that's what I think about that. Might have seemed like a bit of a ramble. I'm excited for this one. I'm excited for the whole James Gunn thing now after the Superman movie. I'm still working that now, reworking, because I've had to clip this whole part out and make a bigger thing out of it. Bigger reaction to the Who Was Everyone in this movie thing. I'm going to go see the movie again, too, because, see it for a fourth time and make sure I didn't miss anything else. I'm still trying to get a good look at that mural that's up on the wall in the Hall of Justice and see who everyone was, because that's pretty cool. I think that we've had a weird moment culturally in people being very puritanical in general about women characters, looking like they have fun in anything. It's like, oh my god, no, Supergirl, this made-up character likes to drink some beers. Oh no, I think that this is exactly the right time for this kind of thing. So let's bring it on. All right, yeah, let's go.